Joining me now in the house, former governor of Virginia, Jim Gilmore. Governor, good to have you.
Physically here with you, John. Glad to be here.
Now, we know we've been telling people that starting today, getting into Washington, D.C. is not going to be an easy thing.
Whoa.
Traffic, and I know you just hit some coming from Reagan.
I'm lucky to be here, to tell you the truth. I've been driving all morning trying to get here. Once there was a breakdown on the GW Parkway, traffic lined up all the way from Reagan Airport to Mount Vernon, and it took over an hour and a half just to get here.
Well, look, I believe it did, no question, but it's great to have you with us. We
Thanks,
just tweeted
John.
a picture out of you, and you look fit as ever, Governor, and you're here for the inauguration. Donald Trump about to be sworn in, the 45th President of the United States, in about, 51 hours from now, 2 days and a piece. It'll be at noon on Friday. I know you're going to be there. You worked hard in this campaign in Virginia with me. We were often at the same events trying to win the state. We couldn't win Virginia, but everything else turned out well. What do you think about the Democratic crybaby caucus? These 50 now, I think it's up to 50 Democratic congressmen that are boycotting the inauguration, going on TV. I mean, I've taken the position, hey, more tickets for us. How about you?
Well, no, I actually don't. I take the position that the Democrats that are going to boycott the inauguration are not being loyal to the country.
Really?
Yes, I do. I think that there's one thing that we Americans pride ourselves in is that we have a free election, that we accept the results of that election. Lord knows the Democrats spent almost a year pounding on Trump, asking him if he was going to accept the results of the election because they were so cocky that Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidency. Then all of a sudden, when it went the other way around, they're not. It's not a matter of not liking Trump or not liking Trump's policies. They're entitled to that. What I don't like is that they're actually challenging the American system of democracy and saying, well, we're not going to participate. We're not going to grant legitimacy to the democratic process. And I think that's wrong. In fact, I really question whether or not they can take the oath of office in the next Congress, to tell you the truth, because they have an obligation to take the oath of office and say they're going to uphold the Constitution. And what they're doing now is trying to undermine that.
Okay, so you're taking a very different position than mine, which I took a much more flippant position, like who cares what they do? They're a bunch of crybabies. Sounds like you're taking a more serious approach, that this is treasonous.
Well, you're probably the better politician because you're willing to kind of brush them off and say that they're being silly. But, look, I think that if the shoe were on the other foot and the Republicans all decided to boycott Hillary Clinton because she had hit all her emails, they would be screaming bloody murder that we were treasonous. So I just think this is wrong. I'm not going to call them traitors like Chelsea Manning or somebody like that. Instead, I'm going to say that they have an obligation as public officials who take the oath of office to uphold the Constitution, to be faithful to the American system of government. If they're not going to do that, they ought to get out of the Congress.
Well, look, on that, I see where you're coming from, Governor Gilmore, because, look, during the campaign, the double standard is they kept asking Trump if he was going to accept the results, and he kept saying, I'm going to wait to see what happens. If there's fraud going on, I have a right to check into it. And they all went crazy over that.
Sure.
And now we're getting the Democrats doing that times 10, and they're getting a pass on us. So the double standard's just unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah, they're not offering any evidence of fraud. Okay, so if the Russians, participated in our election in any way, that is wrong and it needs to be addressed. But so far, there's been no allegation that anything they did or anybody else did changed the real result of the election anywhere. Right. John, look, here's the deal. This election was about the failure of this economy to take care of working men and women in this country. That's what this is about.
Right.
This is about the fact that working men and women in Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania said this approach that the Democratic Party is taking is not good for us, and we're going to vote for change. That's what happened. Now, they may be kidding themselves and saying, well, it's the Russians or it's the FBI and Jim Comey or something else, and we probably ought to encourage that delusion. But they know in their heart of hearts that this is really about the fact that their approach to politics has been wrong for a long time, and they finally paid for it in the industrial Midwest.
They did, and they're going to continue to do that. And I really think that as the economy rises, which I believe it is, and I've said this earlier, Governor, look, at the end of the day, a paycheck is not blue and it's not red, it's green. and a job has no ideology, right? If you're not working and the Democrats are in power, you're a Republican or vice versa. So jobs are the great equalizer. I think as things rise, the economy rises, and people see a potential optimistic future of economic prosperity, I think these Democrats that have behaved this way, I think they're going to get really punished. And I think you're going to see other Democrats start working with Trump in a way that right now nobody's envisioning.
Well, I think
because they don't have a choice.
Sure. I don't think that everything that's going to happen in the future is really predictable up to this point. But I know this. I know that there's a sense of optimism around Washington, D.C. There's a sense of optimism around the United States. There's a deep breath that's being taken, said, my gosh, at least we got a chance to really try to do something in this country again. And I think that is a sense of real hope and change, instead of this frozen sense that some kind of socialism is going to bring us to the promised land when it clearly won't.
Let's get to Chelsea Manning, former Bradley Manning, the individual that was sentenced to 35 years in jail for treason. He's the guy that turned over sensitive military documents to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, compromising United States assets to a certain extent, compromising some of our diplomatic missions. He was Bradley Manning, then he changed to a female while in prison, Chelsea Manning. Then he wanted to go to the female jail rather than the male section. They said no. Obama says, okay, I'm just going to let him out after 4 months, commuted his sentence, took a lot of people by surprise. What did you make of that?
Well, first of all, I think we can't confuse this young man's disorder and his view of life with the crime that he did. Those are two separate things. If this guy wants to live as a woman, I say let him. That's his life and his business and so on. The problem we've really got here is entirely different. John, remember, I was an intelligence agent for the United States Army. I went to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and was trained there the same way that Bradley Manning was. We in the intelligence community love our country. We are very respectful of the dangers that are afforded to this nation. We know that the enemy is watching all the time. They can piece together a variety of pieces of information. In this particular case, this guy on his own just decided to breach his security clearance, breach his training, and breach his loyalty to his country, and turn over a lot of information on his own decision. Nobody can do that. What if we just decide that that's okay, that everybody that has access to classified material could just make a decision on their own to give it to the Russians or give it to ISIS, and because they want to make a point of some kind? Well, that puts the country in danger. There's no question about it. So this is really a bad message to send. I think that the president might have been more benevolent in another way. They could have maybe handled this in a different way. Nobody wants to be cruel to this disturbed young man, but the fact is that we're talking here about a message that we're sending to our adversaries and our friends and our countrymen that we're going to keep our country safe and secure.
So, having said that, if you were advising President Trump on this situation right now with Chelsea Manning, what would it be?
Well, I think it's going to be beyond him. The president has taken his action, which he's entitled to do. When I was the governor, I had absolute clemency power. He's the president. President Obama has the clemency power, and I think the matter will be concluded before Donald Trump comes into office.
Right, but you really think that, I don't want to belabor this, but it did seem odd to me. What was Obama's motivation in this?
He has to explain that, and
he's not done that, right?
I don't believe he's done that. I think he's being kind. This is a very disturbed person who's in a very difficult position and a very challenging thing, but you cannot confuse the crime with his challenges and his difficulties. And not if you're going to actually be a public official here and you have a deep responsibility to your fellow citizens to uphold the law. Now, forgive me, John, but I used to be a defense lawyer, a prosecutor, and an attorney general, so I understand the law. And we have to live by the law. And this guy decided to, in fact, violate the law to the great danger to the United States. And if a person is in the Army and is in the Army intelligence and is granted a security clearance and is giving access to materials, there is a deep public trust put in that person. You have to adhere to that, not just because of the dangers of criminal penalties, because of love of country.
Right. That's what you have to do, no question. I got to get to Obamacare. So, look, let's just cut the nonsense. So, Republicans have had 6 years to come up with a viable replacement. What have they been doing?
Yeah, waiting around, I think, for Obama to leave. They knew that if they came forward with some ideas that he would veto it. But you see, I agree with you. That's the wrong legislative strategy.
Absolutely.
Real leadership would have been to have offered an alternative and the intellectual foundation for it, the policy foundation for it, and begin to go to the public on it. What's going on? What's been going on for the last 8 years is the Democrats have basically said this is the only way that you can do it. And now, if you make any kind of change, you're going to hurt people and throw people in the street, and people aren't going to have health care and all that. Well, you know, there are a lot of ways to remedy this and to make a much more efficient system based on the free market than basically a government-run program. But the intellectual battle is only beginning now. The Republicans now have to begin to persuade the American people that they can take care of themselves, that they can be offered better alternatives, that they can do things. Yes, we can. We can do a better program here. And now that's our burden, and frankly, I don't really see the political leadership yet. Maybe Donald Trump will help us with that.
Well, look, you're absolutely correct. You hit the nail on the head. It's political resolve and political leadership. I mean, you go to Congress, you get voted in. It isn't to just go to functions and raise money and go on CNN. You're in there to get the job done. This is what infuriates me. They've had a 6-year period to come up with a viable plan for replacement. They didn't do it. They didn't put the work in. They got a lot of hodgepodge things out there because they thought Clinton was going to win. It wouldn't matter. So all they do is complain about it, and they got nothing. And then Trump says, well, I'm going to have my own. And then they whine about that and say, well, it's got to go. You know, we have plans. Well, where are they? They don't have anything.
Yeah, and you know what? Look, Medicaid, and I was the governor, and I used to administer Medicaid in Virginia, and it is a growing, burgeoning part of the Virginia budget and could eventually break all the states before it's over with. It can, however, be a major component in a reform. And, what you got right now is the Virginia senators, led by Tim Kaine, saying, well, we want to keep Obamacare and we want to expand Medicaid. Well, I think that the better approach is to say, let's throw out Obamacare and then do something and make a case for Medicaid. But they're not doing that. They're trying to have their cake and eat it, too. And I just think that we're really not seeing the kind of leadership out of the Virginia Senate that we were entitled to. You know, we're a great state, John. Virginia is a great state, big population, big size, very sophisticated, economy, very sophisticated different regions doing different things. And, we're just not getting any real leadership of the United States Senate out of our Democratic senators.
Oh, we're not getting any right now as far as this is concerned. So we've got to work on that. So, Governor, 2 days, Trump's inaugurated, right? 100 days, he's got a very ambitious agenda. What do you think, if you were advising him right now, what do you think of the areas that he should tackle immediately where you think he's going to have the greatest amount of success?
Well, I've been running a nonprofit for years that talks about federal policy. It's presently, the webpage is AmericanOpportunity.org. And we're focused on the growth of the economy and a new foreign policy for the United States, and especially national security. So I think the first thing we've got to do is we've got to get the sequester off of the defense budget so that we can actually rebuild the American military again. By the way, very important for your listenership down in Hampton Roads. Because we need to be in a position to build up the Navy, and you can't do it outside of Hampton Roads, and there are shipyards down there. So, but it isn't a matter of just dollars and cents and jobs. It's a matter of the safety and security of this country. The sequester is on the defense budget because the Democratic Party has said every dollar you spend on the safety of this country, we want another dollar into the welfare state. That's what they're doing, and they're holding the defense budget hostage to prevent the national security from being enhanced. So we have a lot of work to do. I think that President-elect Trump needs to, number one, grow the economy. Grow the economy. The pie's got to get bigger so that there's more revenue, so that there's more money to be able to spend on everything. And second, and by the way, I don't know why the opposition party can't get this. To
Yeah,
run
why can't they get this?
to run a slow growth economy so there's less money makes no sense at all.
No sense.
You got to grow the economy, and I think that the president can hothouse the economy, and that's important. And then second, I think you got to begin to rebuild the economy. We're in basically a really conflict worldwide in a variety of different ways, and the worst is still ahead. So we've got to be prepared for this, and that means you build up the defense budget.
Governor, potholes that Trump is going to run into. I mean, there's still a segment of people in this town that are going to want him to fail, especially early on. What are some of the trapdoors, if you will, things that people are going to try to nail him on that he's really got to sidestep, in your judgment?
Well, you got to watch. Of course, you're not like this, John. But the national press has really got a thing going here. They really want to try to destroy this presidency before it begins, and there's no chance that it's being given, no daylight to Donald Trump. So his challenge has got to be to speak to the American people. Now he's doing that right now through Twitter, but it's harder than that. I think you're going to have actually have a very conscious program of making your case to the people of the United States. Now, that's already underway. The people of this country want a brighter future. They're excited about the prospect of change. They were horrified at the idea that we were going to be stultified for another 4 to 8 years with Hillary Clinton. And I think that's all past now. So there's a sense of optimism, and I think that Trump needs to grasp that and run with it and begin to move forward in some exciting new directions.
No doubt the media is going to try to nail him. Oh, and I agree with you. His ability to go straight to the American people, whether it be on TV from the Oval Office, Twitter, Facebook, other shows, other outlets that are going to get his message out there unfettered, like mine, and there's many like me. I think that's going to be critical, but I agree with you. When the media is going to gang up on him, and they still do have a lot of influence. And remember, I think it was 89% of people don't do Twitter. So, I mean, even if he reached every Twitter person, that's only 11%. So that, as you say, that's not really, it's kind of a stopgap, but it's not really the answer.
No, TV's the answer, and Trump knows this. He that's why he did his rally type of approach to campaigning, because it was good theater for television. And that's what you need to do. But he's going to have to make his case that he wants to move the country in a different direction, and he's going to have to fight back when the left press says, no, you can't do this, or this is bad. He has to say, yes, I can, and this is why it's good.
Right.
That's what he's going to have to do. This is a public policy discussion that we're in the United States of America. It's always true, but never more true than in 2017, when you have so much cable television, so much social media, so much Facebook, so much Twitter, so many cable shows that are on there right now. You got to make your case, and of course he's going to be a master at that. Then it's got to be good policy has got to be put forward, and I think he will.
Governor Gilmore, ISIS losing ground in Iraq. The coalition forces, if you will, now comprised of mainly U.S. advisors and support the Iraqi army. The Kurds pushing ISIS out of the majority now of Mosul, right? I read today they got about 8% or 10% of that city remaining. So they push them out of there, then they're going to pop up somewhere else, right? We all know that. Trump has said, I'm going to crush them. How do you do that?
I think you're going to have to do it militarily and together with our allies. And that's going to once again meet American leadership. And I think he's going to have to point out why it's important to do this. Now, we have to make that case. And that case is that the ISIS people are barbarians. They're vicious to women. They enslave people. They enslave people sexually. They cut people's heads off. They're a barbaric culture, and that can't be permitted to go on. But I also will tell you that your listeners need to know, and they do know, how complicated this whole business is. You've got Iran sitting around on the other side. There's Shiite Muslims versus the Sunni Muslims of ISIS. And you have all this other complications going on in Turkey. And then finally the Russians go in and say, well, we're going to be the real arbiters of power here in the Middle East. This is highly complicated, and it's going to require adroit, real leadership. And I'm optimistic that the president can do that.
But you're saying he's going to have to go in there with some kind of a military operation.
Well, he's going to have to put together something sophisticated in order to be able to stop these people. But I think that the idea of putting an American brigade on the ground is probably not something the American people want him to do.
Right.
So that means the challenge politically is even greater. He's going to have to find allies in the community that have a stake in ISIS being defeated, and then lead that coalition together with our traditional allies in order to stop this thing. But once you've got this thing destroyed, there are two problems. Number one, the philosophy of radical Islam, of this barbaric approach to Islam, must be confronted and defeated. That's what has to be defeated, because you're right, they're going to pop up in other places. We're already seeing it. And it is the philosophy that has to be downgraded, and we have to say that Islam should not stand for slavery and barbarism. I don't think that it does. And the leadership of the Islamic community in the United States and worldwide can't permit themselves to be manipulated into that kind of position. So this is going to require a lot of combination of people to speak out on behalf of civilization. And yes, there's going to have to be some military approach to this, but that's ongoing right now, John.
Well, it is, no question. Let's get to Department of State Rex Tillerson. Actually, I had a chance to meet him yesterday.
Good.
I was in just coming out of Mark Warner's Senate office, I believe. And and he was going to meet with Elizabeth Warner. So I actually bumped into him in the hallway.
Elizabeth Warren.
What did I say? Warner?
You said Warner.
No, Beth Warren. Yeah, he was going to meet with Elizabeth Warren, senator from Massachusetts.
Wow, woman.
And so I bumped into him in the hallway, and of course, not wanting to be shy, I introduced myself and asked him a question. He was like, I got to go, but. Really nice guy, looked like a very serious dude, and he was on his way to that meeting, and I'm sure he was going to get grilled by her. Chairman ExxonMobil, a choice that a little outside the box, no doubt. What was your overall reaction, and how do you think he'll do?
Once again, like many of these, at the beginning of any administration, you don't actually know, but a guy that's risen up to be the CEO of a major corporation like that has got to be a serious person who's dealt with a lot of international issues. So I'm optimistic about that. I'm optimistic that he's going to be able to point a good direction. But there's an awful lot of complications out there that have to be addressed, and you got Russia, Iran, China, and the Mideast crisis and the international terrorist crisis. This is a lot on the plate for the Department of Defense and the Department of State. But I'm confident that Mattis and Tillerson can be good partners in addressing these issues with the president-elect.
So do you think it was a good choice?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the president-elect had lots of choices he could have made. He is the one who has been elected to make that decision. This is a substantive guy with a great deal of experience, and I'm optimistic that it's going to be a success.
Governor, you're going to run for U.S. Senate in 2018. I know you have to we're exploring it and thinking about it, but I know you're going to run. And why not? You were governor, and you won a statewide election in a landslide, and you had the car tax thing, and you had a message, and you were fun, and then you were chairman of the 9/11 Commission. You were governor of Virginia during the 9/11 attack. You've got great foreign policy experience. You're going to run for U.S. Senate against Tim Kaine. Why not? Wide open, right?
Well, we certainly don't want to make any announcements here, John.
No, I'm just
you
saying.
Understand, not only is it still 2 years away, but Federal Election Commission wouldn't appreciate the fact that you're announcing and then you don't have a committee.
I'm surmising.
Yeah, you're surmising. So
I'm conjecturing.
Look, here's the deal. It's not a matter of being a wannabe. I mean, I've already been the governor. You can't take that away from me. I was glad to be the governor of Virginia. I think we moved the state forward. I think the car tax cut helped a lot of people. It continues to help people. We moved the state forward economically, on education issues particularly. We added teachers to the schools. We funded higher education at the highest levels they've ever seen, which was then drawn back after I left the governorship. And the point is, I've spent a great deal of time now talking about the federal and national issues for years, particularly with my nonprofit, AmericanOpportunity.org. And I would encourage people to go to that webpage and let's explore some of these issues going forward. The point is that all I care about is trying to help this country at this point in my life, in whatever capacity works best for the people of Virginia and for the people of the United States. That's what I want to try to do. I'm having good success in private life. I'm enjoying doing that too. But my opportunity to help the country here at this point is, many options. Maybe running for the United States Senate is an option. I've run before. I think it would be a move the country forward by being a United States, but let's wait and see whether or not that's something that's appropriate.
I think you're going to run. But again, that's my opinion. But of course, as you know, Governor, I never get this stuff wrong. I've got you right off the bat as the second choice. I put my odds out today. Carly Fiorina in mind right now, the slight favorite in the race. Laura Ingraham says she might get in. Yeah, I've got her at 9-2. Everybody else is going to think, oh, it's a done deal. If she gets in, she wins. I don't. I think she's going to have a rude awakening. I mean, you just can't walk in, do nothing, walk in, and then expect the Republican in a state like Virginia, which is very convoluted, very difficult, a lot of people involved, to just hand you the nomination and say, hey, thanks for running. Maybe they could do that in Massachusetts. They're not going to do that in Virginia. I mean, just can you imagine Laura Ingraham like showing up at the Buchanan GOP committee meeting? Did you imagine her at like the Lexington Waffle House shaking hands with people? It's not going to happen. Maybe she wins by a bunch of consultants going on TV, but I deal in reality and not hype. Now, Laura Ingraham also said she was going to be press secretary for Trump. That was never even considered. So part of this is just out there, and she starts her own rumors. I'm not sure what she's going to do, but if she does get in the race, it's no cakewalk. Let me just tell you that. But here's why I like Jim Gilmore getting in the race, because he's going to make everybody talk about serious foreign policy. And if you're going to be a U.S. Senator from Virginia, where are you going to be if you win? You're going to be in the Foreign Relations Committee. That's going to be your first assignment. And I think what you bring, three things to the table, just a breadth of experience because you've been there. You're going to make people stake out positions on foreign policy because you'll be in the Foreign Relations Committee. Plus, you're kind of the happy warrior. You're kind of fun to be around. So I think that's all good.
Well, I've been around, and the foreign policy issues are certainly a lifelong passion of mine. I studied it at UVA. I joined the Army intelligence agent, was stationed in California and West Germany at the time. I actually saw the Berlin Wall long before it fell, and dealt in those issues when I was in Germany. And then, of course, I was chairman of the National Commission on Terrorism for the United States, and of course, was governor during the 9/11 attack. So I think that the national foreign policy issues are certainly a passion of mine, particularly at this time. The Russians are a very difficult people. It would be great if we could build a relationship with them the way that we did during Reagan and Gorbachev. But it takes two to tango. The Russians are going to have to start to learn how to cooperate with other people instead of trying to reassemble their empire.
So, Governor, let's get to foreign policy. Putin, Russia. Trump has said a lot of things. There's a lot of conjecture. But I look at it and I say, okay, we have a common enemy, ISIS. That is a common enemy. That's a good thing. Sometimes, what's the old saying? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Where do we go with Putin and Russia?
I think the president, Trump, is going to have to be careful about these people. I think he's going to have a clear picture of what he's trying to accomplish. To the point that there can be some commonality with Russia, then we ought to try to find those things. When Gorbachev and Reagan were trying to find common ground, it was good for the world to begin to move forward. It was good for Russia. The problem I see, John, is that I've spent a lifetime working and thinking about Russia. I grew up in the Cold War. I was an intelligence agent assigned to Germany during the Cold War, and I just think that you have to take the Russians with a grain of salt and be prepared to push back. I think that they are in a conflict with us that they shouldn't be in. They're in a conflict with us on cyber. They're in a conflict with us on other various areas. And we just have to understand that they respect power, they respect force, and if we are prepared to draw the line on the Russians, maybe we can find some way to work together on some things like ISIS.
Okay. What strategic interests do we have? What security strategic interests do we have in Crimea, Ukraine, right? These satellite states Governor, have been in the Russian influence for a very long time. They're in the Soviet Union. They're out of the Soviet Union. Nazis came in, liberated the Ukraine, then they're back in. Why is the CIA and American foreign policy so beside themselves when the Russian Federation leadership decides to make moves in their own sphere that have absolutely nothing to do with the United States? Why?
Seems to me that what we really ought to be hoping for is that Russia itself reforms and becomes an actual democracy where there can be an actual free economy and an actual player in the international scene. To have their anger and frustration and sense of inferiority lead them into aggression against other people is inherently dangerous. The Baltic states have to be preserved. Poland has to be preserved. One might take the position that Poland was a part of the Russian Empire. Well, I don't take that position. I think that the Poles are entitled to be free. I think the Ukrainians are entitled to be free. But that's not the heart of the matter. I think the heart of the matter is that once you begin to change borders through force, anything goes in Europe. And that's what the Russians did in the Crimea, John. And the borders of Ukraine were guaranteed. They were guaranteed by Russia, and they were guaranteed by the United States. And so to have them invade the Crimea and to annex it by force is inherently dangerous. I still believe that a good future can come forward for all of us, and if Trump can make that happen, more power to him. But there's no substitute for American resolve and American force, and that's why I think that the defense budget has to be built up.
Okay, so neither the Crimea or the Ukraine are part of NATO. So when you say their borders were guaranteed, are you talking about, certainly not by the Yalta Conference, so what were they guaranteed by?
Yeah, there was a deal made, and the deal was that they actually had Russian nukes. And at the breakup of the Soviet Empire, there was a deal, and the deal was an agreement that they would surrender their nukes and send them back to Russia in return for a guarantee of their borders. And that to make that happen, it was guaranteed by Britain, the United States, and Russia. You got to have some faithfulness to these international agreements, or once again, Europe is an inherently unstable place. And you just have to try to create some sense of stability in that continent, and NATO and the European Union can do that. Now, by the way, I'm no great fan of the European Union. I think that Brexit was probably a good thing for the British and a good thing for us, too. But you don't want Europe to break down and become a Soviet satellite. Or, excuse me, that's the old days, right? A Russian satellite.
Well, it sounds like, Governor, what you're saying is you have to be wary of the Russians, right? I mean, you have to be wary of any power like them. But what would be wrong with Trump taking the approach of sitting down and trying to find some common areas? And the first common enemy that we have is ISIS. I mean, why not get Putin involved in a serious way in there? And I'm going to ask the same question I did in the Ukraine and Crimea about Syria. I mean, Syria's been an ally of the Russian Federation, the Soviet Union, the czars, going back to the 1800s. They've been an ally. We're not involved in this. Why do we have to react every time the Russian Federation decides to make a geopolitical move? Why do we have to get involved with that?
You don't have to, and you have to have a sophisticated foreign policy. And I think that the one thing that Trump is saying is, look, let's open our minds here and see if there are opportunities. I can't see that that's a problem, but there's no substitute for having your relations with the Russians with your eyes wide open and what their ultimate goals are. And I think that we have a right to kind of figure out what they're trying to do. Now, the current thinking is that Putin is using the United States sort of as a scapegoat to keep power for himself within Russia. Look, this is a central issue that has to be faced, and I'm confident that Trump and Tillerson will do so. But look, let's go back to what Reagan said: trust but verify. And we have a lot to do to make that relationship work. Meanwhile, we're confronted with challenges on a variety of different places. The Chinese are a very serious problem here. By day they're trading partners with us, and by night they're invading the South China Sea. Iran, this situation we're in right now, is that the problem stopped them theoretically from creating a nuclear weapon, But the deal is that in a short period of time, they can do anything they want to. So what that means is that the Jordanians and the Saudis and the Egyptians have got to be reacting to that. Not then, but now. So there's an inherent instability everywhere, and I think that the United States has to guard itself and be prepared and handle its foreign policy with sophistication.
What is our biggest threat right now from the Chinese governor, in your judgment?
The danger is that that they will decide, as a matter of national policy, that they want to be aggressive imperialists. That's the danger. Nobody around their periphery wants that. The Vietnamese don't. The Japanese don't. The Taiwanese certainly don't. The South Koreans don't. And the inherent danger is that the Chinese will say, "Look, we're the center of everything, and we're going to be imperialist." That is, and we're going to. And if they say we're going to push the United States out of the Pacific, well, we've seen that story before, and that created a major world war. Now, I don't think that the Chinese are in a position to have a war with the United States, and I don't think they want one. But we have a right of ourselves. Just because they have their own attitude doesn't mean we have to adopt it. We have the right to have navigation of the seas and support of our allies in the Pacific, and the United States has no business being pushed back to Pearl Harbor.
And the Chinese dumping steel in the U.S., dumping aluminum, pay no tariffs, trying to put aluminum and steel manufacturers under, manipulating currency. They do it all the time. They subsidize these industries at our expense. Trump saying he's going to put a stop to it. How is he going to do that?
Well, it's a really great question, and it goes to the issues of trade policy. But I think that it requires a granular look. The Chinese should not get away with manipulation of their currency to our disadvantage.
Right.
They should not get away with taking away jobs by manipulation of the economies. They need to be playing on the same level playing field with us. And the president, I think, President-elect has said that he's going to insist on it, and I think that he should. I think that trade policy is very key here, and personally, I trade's been going on since the caveman. We're going to continue to have trade. The question is, are we being taken advantage of? And I think that Trump's right to take a close look at that.
How would you handle the situation in North Korea, Governor?
Well, that's the toughest question you've asked. Really, I think the American people are going to very quickly have to make a decision. Do we willing to have a country like that have a ballistic missile that can hit San Francisco or Alaska with a nuclear weapon? And if we make a decision that we're not going to permit that, then either publicly or privately or both, we're going to have to convey that. And as for the Chinese, I think we're going to have to just say, look, there's a red line here that we're going to have to draw, and you can't allow a nutty, crazy regime like that to be in a position to intimidate us by striking our major cities with a nuclear weapon. You just can't permit it. So I think there are tough times ahead, John. No doubt about this. I think that you've dwelt on the foreign policy issues on our program this morning, and you're right to do so. I think these challenges are ahead, and once again, you got to build up the economy, create more revenue, more jobs, and more opportunities for Americans, but a greater resource bank for us so that we can take the sequester off the defense budget and we can exercise the American leadership worldwide that we ought to be exercising together with our allies. That's been the salvation of the 20th century, and I believe under Trump's presidency we have a chance for it to be the salvation of the 21st.
Governor, let's go to the governor's race, right?
Sure.
Let's start with the Republican candidates. Give me a quick assessment of their campaign. We got 5 minutes, so we should have plenty of time. And let's start with the front runner, Ed Gillespie. What do you think?
Well, I think he's a good guy. He's been around a long time. He understands public policy. He's well connected. He's going to be well financed. I think he's motivating himself to get a really good campaign going, and I like him.
I think it's a prohibitive favorite to win. How about you?
I think that's probably right as it stands today. There are several other candidates in the race. I think it's a little premature to be putting any crowns on people, but I think that Gillespie has worked at it very hard and very long in order to prepare himself to be the nominee and be the governor. Wagner has a distinguished career in the state Senate, and he has a base in Hampton Roads, and that can't be overlooked. Corey Stewart is very flamboyant. He's chairman of the Board of Supervisors of Prince William, and that's a very good power base, by the way. I really like Prince William. very well populated area that's kind of a bridge between downstate and upstate. And he's very flamboyant. You run into some problems every now and then, though, that he's gonna have to deal with as he goes forward. And finally, there's a new guy by the name of Denver Riggleman who's coming into it. He's a businessman from Charlottesville. I think he intends to self-fund. He's still introducing himself. Let's see whether that goes anywhere or not. But the guy that's laid all the groundwork and the spade work clearly is Ed Gillespie.
Only threat to him right now that I see is Wagner would have to mount a very late challenge. Possible that he does that. And Denver Riggleman might catch lightning in a bottle. I've seen it happen. It could happen. If he does that, he could close late. But right now, I think we both agree this is Gillespie's race to lose. I really think the entrance of Riggleman almost puts the match out on the Corey Stewart campaign. I mean, almost every vote that Riggleman gets early is going to come from either Corey Stewart or could have been Stewart. And so I think his campaign really, really hurts Stewart. Let's go to the Democratic side. Everybody thought fait accompli. Dr. Ralph Northam, he's a nominee. Not so fast. Tom Perriello, former congressman, a liberal icon, gets in that race, fires the activist up. What happens?
Well, that's fun. First of all, I don't really know Ralph Northam, the lieutenant governor, very well. I've actually only met him a single time, so I don't know him. But I believe he is underestimated as a candidate, based upon just as an outsider. He's a physician. He's a military guy. He's a true blue Virginian. VMI guy, which is a very powerful network in the state of Virginia. Believe me, right. I know. I've had them for me, and they're really great people, but they're loyal to their own. So I think that Northam is underestimated. Perriello, I don't know at all. He's going to come into it from the left, from the far left. So I really think it's more honestly about the makeup and nature of the Democratic Party. What are they really? If they're a lefty type of operation, the way they were with Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine, then Perriello could win the thing. It's a primary, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a primary.
Well, anybody can win. Riggleman could win if he spends enough money and introduces himself fast enough. I suppose there's a possibility that anybody can win a primary. This is not a convention setting. And on the Democratic side, same thing. But, the question is, what's the voting public going to look like on the Democratic side? Is it going to be much more standard Virginian, in which case I think the lieutenant governor is underestimated, or is it going to be kind of a weird lefty type of party, the way they tend to want to lean, in which case Perriello can get in? That's what he's thinking.
Well, I think the independents that decide to participate in the primary, true independents, there's no party ID registration in Virginia, but I think true independents, most of them, if they participate, they're going to go on the Republican side simply because there's more action there. Primaries on the same day. And that leaves the Democratic primary participants being hardcore Democrats. I think that favors Perriello. I think last time when Northam won and beat Anish Chopra, he got, I think, well over 10,000 crossover votes, moderate Republicans and independents voting for Northam. Didn't like Jackson, didn't like Chopra. He got the benefit of that. Not going to happen in June 13th of 2017. He's on his own with Democrats. So we'll be following it, but we're out of time today. I want to thank Governor Jim Gilmore for coming in our studios here, and I believe Jim Gilmore will run for the U.S. Senate in 2018, but that's just my conjecture.